getting children, pupils to understand about historical concepts. This explicitly includes the following as far as the curriculum is concerned. Continuity and change, which is one of the obvious ones for us, cause and consequence, similarity, difference and significance, and to getting pupils to be able to create structured accounts of the past. Understanding methods of historical inquiry looks at, in specifics, the use of evidence to make historical claims and contrasting arguments and interpretations between historians, or in our case, between, say, historians and archaeologists. Placing knowledge into different contexts includes connecting the local with the regional, with the national and the international, and connecting the different aspects of ways of life in the past: culture, economy, warfare, politics, religion and society. Now, that's all very well for Key Stage 3, and it gives us ways in, and I'll go into more detail in those very shortly. But we also have the possibility at GCSE. There are new GCSE specifications which began to be taught in 2016, which are going to be examined for the first time this summer, summer 2018. There are 4 history GCSE specifications for England. AQA have 1, Edexcel have 1, OCR, Oxford and Cambridge, have 2. History A is modern world history, so we'll bypass that one for the sake of this afternoon. And it's History B for the OCR, which is the one that's important for us. Those 3 GCSE specifications all have an optional depth study on the Normans, Norman England. The dates differ slightly between each one, as you can see. AQA takes it 1066 to 1100, Edexcel slightly before the Conquest to 1088, and OCR again very slightly before the Conquest up to the end of the reign of King William. So there is the facility there. There is also a facility in one of the A-level syllabuses, and it's the A-level produced by OCR, which has, and again, an optional module which covers 1035 to 1107. So there is a facility A-level as well. Now, what I don't have is the numbers of pupils who are students who are studying these optional units at GCSE and A-level. These are just one among several optional units available to be taught at this level. It will be very interesting to know, and I suspect the number of students studying this period at GCSE and A-level may well be quite limited, but you would have to work with the exam boards to find out exactly where these particular options were being offered. Now, the nice thing about the GCSEs is that these 3 are based largely upon the GCSEs produced under the auspices of the School's History Project. The School's History Project is an association of history teachers that began in the 1970s who were dissatisfied with the chronological narrative approach to teaching history and wanted pupils to learn about historical skills, for pupils to become little historians, analysing and interpreting data for themselves. And the School's History Project are very friendly towards archaeology. There are 6 principles which underlie the School's History Project, and as we see them here, making history meaningful for young people. I'll come on to that one right at the end of my talk. But there are some here which are absolutely central to us. So, for example, making sure people study the historic environment. That's one of the founding principles of the SHP. And so they are very, very strong on this, making this link between archaeological evidence, material evidence, and the teaching of history. So let me go into a bit more detail into some of these Key Stage 3 and GCSE sort of topics and ideas, and see how we might tackle them with the Normans. The most obvious one, of course, is the idea of continuity and change, Key Stage 3. This is just so easy and straightforward, really, for the Norman Conquest. What was life like in Anglo-Saxon England? What was life like in Norman England? What changed? But also, very important to emphasise, what continued and carried on the same. Not everything changed. And different sections of society would have noticed different amounts of change in different parts of their lives. So it's a much more complicated, nuanced idea that we need to get to grips with. Cause and consequence. Again, there are so many to choose from here, many of which are very good for us. There was a conquest. As part of that stamping of William's authority, he needed to take over the Anglo-Saxon church, and after a while, with some depositions and some just filling in dead men's shoes as the Anglo-Saxon bishops died off, the church hierarchy was replaced by largely continental clerics who brought in new ideas, who brought in new styles of architecture, and we have the building of new cathedrals replacing the Anglo-Saxon ones. You've got to move on from that and then explore, okay, so what? How different were the new cathedrals being built from the old ones that they replaced? Is it just a question of size? Is it more a question of new artistic sensibilities, new symbolism, symbolism about power? How does the symbolism of Christianity change at this time as well? And what effect might this have had on the population and on the staff, the people who were the priests and canons of the church itself, who largely, of course, remained English? And we have I think there's a wonderful description of Archbishop Worcester, actually crying and weeping at the demolition of his Anglo-Saxon cathedral to be replaced by the new Norman-style Romanesque cathedral, a replacement that he himself had ordered as the last Anglo-Saxon representative, but now part of the new Norman regime. So again, exploring what effect would this have had on the local people who came to these cathedrals, and then the knock-on effect on churches. Similarity, difference in significance. Well, again, this allows us then to look across the divide, to look across 1066, contrast the Burg of Athene and the Castle of Abarra. How do they differ? In what ways materially are they the same? In what ways materially are they different? And what effect does this have locally? How is this played out in terms of the relationship between landlords and tenants in the manorial structure? How is this played out symbolically in how people feel towards the new lords with these high, obviously militaristic, very impressive new castles springing up all over the place? And of course, this leads us on nicely into trying to get the pupils and students to think about, can they create structured accounts of life at the time? And so you might want to bring in some narrative theory and storytelling here. And how can we get children to engage with the stories we might tell of people's experience of the Norman conquest? So they might, for example, take a day in the life of, or a month, or a year, or a week in the life of particular people, with, from our point of view, a focus on the materiality, the material aspects of that life. And so, for example, in a classical narrative, you will have particular characters. So the farmer or the artisan or their family, make sure you include men, women and children as part of this. You need a setting. So the setting could be the village, the rural village, or the town. You need various actions. You need what people are doing stuff in the story. So what is it about daily life or the seasonal rhythms through the year that is structured around the materiality, the material goods and artifacts that we find in our museums and elsewhere in the historical record and PAS record and so on? And then, of course, in all good narratives have some extra diegetic happening which comes in, which knocks everyone sideways, which introduces change in some way, to which people have to adapt. And in our case, that is the conquest. What effect does that have on the actual daily life of the normal farming family in the village, or that of the small-scale artisan in the town? Does it make a difference to when they get up in the morning, to what they eat, to what they dress, to where they go, to where they shop, to what they can buy, to the dues they have to pay to various people throughout the year, to attending sort of 3 times a year, or twice a year, the 100 moot, to the local court cases, and if they have fines to pay, whom they pay them to, and all the materiality of place and materiality of artifacts that form part of their life. How does that interact with their structured way of life and what happens at the time? And again, it's about what changes, what doesn't change, and what is the effect of the conquest on real people and real families, which takes it away from this constant harping on about the knights and the king and the upper strata of society, and getting it back to the majority of people. Then, of course, when we want to look at the idea of historic inquiry, well, we've got plenty, haven't we, of possibilities. How about looking at Warren Percy, the excavations there, and the uncovering of remains of manorial houses, compare the archaeology of these sites with what we know from the Domesday Book entries, for example. Or how about looking at some Anglo-Saxon charters which have charter bounds and following those bounds on a map and actually in the landscape? And what is the materiality of those parish charter bounds, and how many survive right through to the present day as the boundaries of modern parishes? Things like that. So quite straightforward when you're looking at different kinds of historical evidence. And of course, we have the making connections. We've seen already there are plenty of ways of doing this. Making geographical connections between your locality, your region, the nation, and international. Well, yes, schools. Search your HER for local impact, for local examples of late Anglo-Saxon and Norman. Have a look at place names in your local area. See if any were affected by the Norman conquest. Where was your nearest castle as a school? Does it still survive? Is there much to see? If not, why not? Look at the Domesday Book. Who was your landowner in 1066? Who was the landowner in 1086? Is there a change there between your immediate landowner? Look at the PAS records. What has been found locally around you in your school that links with these wider historical events? It's all there, but the teachers often need pointing to these resources and ways in which they can be used. Most teachers will not be aware of what an HER is. They won't even understand the acronym. And most teachers will not have heard of the PAS, sadly. And so you really need to spell this out for them, by and large. Obviously, there are exceptions. Again, ideas. Now, ideas for making connections. What about the different aspects of society at the time? I've just got to work a way of fitting this into my rucksack. I bought this about half an hour ago downstairs. Coins of the realm from King Alfred all the way through 1066 up into modern times. We still use coins today. I use them to buy this with. And it's something that all children know. And there's something in there which coins are a wonderful resource to use. And unlike the historical ruler downstairs, which you can buy in a shop, it doesn't begin in 1066 with William. It actually crosses the boundary, and that's really useful from our point of view. Don't get me started on the rulers. I hate those rulers and always have. But never mind, that's something else. And so coins. There's so much you can talk about here. The symbolism on the coins. Look at how that changed between before and after. There is a discrete change between the symbolism that's used on the coins before and after the conquest. For example, look at the value, look at the economic value of the silver penny at the time, and the sparse evidence we have for the values of things in charters and laws and later documents, and sort of standards of living at the time, and things like that. Think about the coin as a symbol of royal authority, and the fact that it was often stated as a payment of fines that you had to do for part of your life. And coinage isn't something that was there just for you to buy things with. Coins were things that you had to give away because you'd done something naughty. There's a statement of power and politics involved in that. And look at the names on the obverse side of the coins, which are stamped with the moneyers' names. You have individual named people. A large class of middle-class Anglo-Saxon financiers, merchants at the time, who would often have control over more than one mint and controlling the money of the coins. And look at how those changed or not across the divide, and how this Anglo-Saxon middle class of merchants largely survived the conquest in place. And you don't see the replacement of Anglo-Saxon names by non-Anglo-Saxon names until well into the 12th century, way after the conquest itself. And so you can start talking about aspects of society that aren't quite obvious from most of the surviving records, which are all about knights and warfare and that kind of thing. There is another aspect of medieval life. And so these are all quite useful things to do, and we can think then about how then do we make this period meaningful for people and give people connections. I'm always reminded of Freeman Tilden's first principle of heritage interpretation from 1957, which I love, which says that in order to interpret the past or the heritage to anyone, you need to relate it to something in the visitor's experience, background, or culture. It has to resonate in some way for them. So they have to care. Why should I care about the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans and what happened in 1066? Well, we then go back to looking at the school's history project and look at the school's history project core principle, number 1. A determination to connect history to young people's lives was the foundation of the original school's council history project. Many young people still find it difficult to articulate why they are studying history. And this is very true. There was a project done by the then Qualifications and Curriculum Authority, must be at least 10 to 15 years ago now, where they had Nottingham Trent University go and interview large numbers of Key Stage 3 school students. And what they found was a lot of students saying, oh, history. Oh, God, history is really, really boring. I really don't want to do it at GCSE. And 2/3 of students do not choose to do history at GCSE. And then those who did think it was interesting, if they were asked, well, why is history important? Big blank. They couldn't really articulate why. Other than the fact it's just a source of interesting stories. Well, it's actually more than that. History is actually very important. And so, as the SHP says, history educators, we need to make our subject meaningful for all children and young people by relating history to their lives in the 21st century. Okay, so how might we make the Norman Conquest meaningful to people in the 21st century? Well, let me suggest one possibly controversial way of doing it. I'm going to take a look at the World Archaeological Congress and WAC and its first code of ethics. And here's one way you might do it. To acknowledge the importance of indigenous cultural heritage, including sites, places, objects, artifacts, human remains to the survival of indigenous cultures. Principle 2, to acknowledge the importance of protecting indigenous cultural heritage to the well-being of indigenous peoples. 5, to acknowledge that the indigenous cultural heritage rightfully belongs to the indigenous descendants of that heritage. Now, there is a lovely project you can do with school children and students to examine the Norman Conquest and the relationship between indigenous Anglo-Saxons and nasty incoming Frenchmen, Normans. Oh, there's a really meaningful, juicy way of interrogating a period to make pupils think and to make pupils understand that history actually might have lessons for us at the present day. And amongst the lessons from the Norman Conquest, surely, are about cultural interaction, about England's relationships with the rest of Europe, and about the long-term development of new cultural identities out of this meeting of different cultures. And that's something that surely has resonance at the present day. And I've gone through all of this without once mentioning the B word and Brexit. Thank you very much for listening.